What would you do if you heard a woman scream for her life in a barn at sunset? The question snapped through Nathaniel Keller's mind the second he heard the sound cut across the quiet Montana evening. One moment the valley was peaceful, painted gold by the fading light. The next moment a gunshot split the air, followed by a woman's terrified scream. Nathaniel didn't think twice. He kicked his Palomino into a hard gallop, his heart pounding as dust rose behind him. He had been checking the eastern boundary of his ranch when the scream came from the Bowmont property next door. He rarely rode that way anymore. Not since Clayton Reynolds had taken over that land 6 months earlier. People whispered about him, about the trouble he brought wherever he went. Nathaniel had always trusted those whispers. But tonight, trouble wasn't just a rumor. It was a scream. As he raced toward the old barn, dread pressed on his chest. He jumped off his horse before it had fully stopped and ran to the big wooden doors. They were barred shut from the outside with a heavy beam. His stomach twisted. Someone wanted whoever was inside to stay trapped. Another scream came, sharper and more desperate. Nathaniel grabbed the beam with both hands. The wood dug into his palms, but he didn't let go. He heaved once, twice. The third time, the beam cracked free, falling into the dirt. With one powerful shove, he slammed the door open. "She's free now," he said, his voice steady even though his pulse raced. Inside, shadows filled the barn, but he saw everything in one heartbeat. A young woman with honey blonde hair stood cornered in a stall, her dress ripped at the shoulder, her face cut and bruised, tears mixed with blood at her temple. Fear filled her eyes. Between them stood Clayton Reynolds, swaying on his feet, a broken whiskey bottle gripped in his fist. His face was twisted with rage. "This ain't your business, Keller," Reynolds growled. His breath stank of alcohol. "Get off my property." Nathaniel's hand hovered near his holster. "I'm not leaving without her." The woman stared at him with a look he hadn't seen since childhood. Norah Bowmont. He had played with her once near the creek when they were small. After her father sent her east for school, she never returned, until now. And now she was standing here in a torn dress, shaking with fear because of this man. Reynolds lunged with a jagged bottle raised high. Nathaniel reacted on instinct. He stepped aside, grabbed the man's wrist, and twisted sharply. The bottle hit the ground. Nathaniel threw a hard punch to Reynolds' jaw. The man crashed into the hay, dazed. "Miss Bowmont," Nathaniel said, keeping his eyes on Reynolds. "Can you ride?" She wiped her cheek with a trembling hand. "Yes." "Then, come on. My horse is outside." Reynolds tried to stand. Nathaniel didn't wait. He took Norah's hand and ran with her out of the barn. They had barely reached his horse when a gunshot exploded behind them. A bullet tore through the doorframe inches from Nathaniel's head. Norah gasped, but held tighter. "Hold on," he said as he helped her up. She climbed behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. He felt her shaking as his horse leapt forward, hooves thundering across the field. Reynolds. Angry shouts faded as they crossed the creek that marked the border between the two ranches. Only then did Nathaniel slow the horse. Norah's grip loosened as she let out a weak breath. Her head fell against his back. "Thank you," she whispered. He would have killed me. "You're safe now, Miss Bowmont." "I promise you that." As they rode toward Nathaniel's small ranch house, the mountains glowed orange in the last light of day. Norah stayed pressed close, her tears soaking the back of his shirt. She seemed too light, too fragile. The kind of woman who should have been hosting tea parties in Boston parlors, not fighting for her life in a barn. When they reached the porch, Nathaniel climbed down and helped her dismount. Her knees buckled, and he caught her gently. "Easy," he said. Lamplight shone from the windows. Mrs. Abernathy, his older housekeeper, rushed to the door. "Good heavens!" she gasped. "What happened?" "Mrs. Abernathy," Nathaniel said, guiding Norah inside. "This is Miss Norah Bowmont. She needs help." "Oh, sweetheart," the housekeeper murmured, placing a hand on Norah's back. "Come sit by the fire." Norah sank onto the sofa, her hands shaking in her lap. In the warm light, Nathaniel saw the full extent of her injuries. The darkening bruise, the swollen lip, the cut still bleeding. His jaw tightened with anger. "Bring hot water and bandages," he said. Mrs. Abernathy hurried away. Nathaniel knelt beside Norah, carefully picking up her hand. "You're safe here," he said gently. "No one will hurt you again." Norah blinked rapidly, fighting tears. He locked me inside, said I had stolen papers, said he'd teach me a lesson." Nathaniel's anger grew sharper. "Why was he after you?" She swallowed. "He told the townsfolk my father sold him the ranch before he died. But that's a lie. I confronted him about it tonight after finding letters in his desk." That's when he snapped. Nathaniel exhaled slowly. "Reynolds is dangerous, more dangerous than people know." Mrs. Abernathy returned with bandages and a basin of steaming water. Nathaniel reached for a cloth, then hesitated when Norah flinched. "Would you rather Mrs. Abernathy tend your wounds?" he asked softly. Norah shook her head. "No, you can." Carefully, he cleaned the cut on her temple. She winced but stayed still. When she finished eating the warm stew Mrs. Abernathy brought, exhaustion settled over her. Nathaniel led her to the guest room. She paused at the doorway, gripping the frame. "Mr. Keller," she whispered, "what if he comes tonight?" "I'll be right here," Nathaniel said. "I'll keep watch." She nodded slowly and stepped inside. When the door closed, Nathaniel walked to the living room, loaded his revolver, and took a seat facing the front door. The fire crackled beside him. Outside, the Montana night dropped into silence. Inside, a terrified woman slept for the first time in days. And Nathaniel Keller kept his promise, listening to every sound in the darkness. The first light of morning crept over the horizon as Nathaniel stood on his porch, stiff from a night spent awake in a wooden chair. He sipped his coffee and scanned the quiet land. No sign of Clayton Reynolds, no riders, no shadows in the trees, only the soft glow of dawn spreading over the mountains. The door opened softly behind him. Norah stepped out, wrapped in Mrs. Abernathy's shawl. Her bruises were darker today, her split lip slightly swollen, but her back was straight, and her chin was lifted. She looked stronger in the morning light. "Good morning, Mr. Keller," she said quietly. "Mrs. Abernathy told me you kept watch all night." He tipped his hat, couldn't sleep much knowing he might come. She walked to the railing, her fingers wrapping around the wood. "I didn't sleep well either." Every sound felt like him coming back. "You don't have to worry," Nathaniel told her. "Not while you're here." Norah took a deep breath and stared out at the peaceful land, the same land she grew up on just a few miles away. "I never thought I'd come back to Montana like this. Father loved these hills. I always felt safe here until Reynolds showed up." Nathaniel handed her the coffee. "We're gonna fix this." She looked up at him. "How?" "First," he said, "we take you to Sheriff Wilson and the lawyer in town. We show them your wounds. We tell them everything." Norah hesitated. "But my father's papers, they're at the ranch. They prove he never sold the property." "Then we'll go get them," Nathaniel said, "but not alone, not without a plan." Mrs. Abernathy stepped outside with a small basket. "Eat before you ride off, both of you." They sat on the porch steps and ate in silence. Norah only picked at her food, her mind far away. "We'll swing around the back of your property," Nathaniel said once they finished. "There's an old trail through the woods. You won't be seen." "A trail behind the orchard," Norah said softly. "Father used to walk it with me when I was little." Nathaniel saddled his palomino and Mrs. Abernathy's gentle mare for Norah. She wore borrowed clothes now, trousers and a shirt cinched tight at the waist. The clothing made her look different, stronger, capable. As they rode away from the ranch house, the morning air was cool and sharp. Norah sat straight in the saddle, though her hands trembled slightly. "You ride well," Nathaniel said. "My father insisted I learn before he sent me east," she answered. "He always said a Bowmont woman should know how to handle a horse." Nathaniel smiled. He was a wise man. They talked as they rode, sharing pieces of their lives. Nathaniel told her about building his ranch after returning from the war, about nights when he couldn't sleep because of memories he couldn't shake. She told him about Boston, how she'd studied teaching, how she'd written adventure stories for ladies, magazines under a secret pen name. "You write?" Nathaniel asked, surprised. Norah blushed lightly. "Not very well." "I doubt that," he said. "You talk like someone who thinks deeply." She didn't respond, but her eyes softened. By mid-morning, they reached the woods behind the Bowmont ranch. They dismounted quietly, tying their horses between the trees. A big black and tan hound suddenly bounded toward them. Norah gasped, "Samson!" The dog shoved his head into her hands and whined with joy. She crouched, embracing him. "He's my father's dog," she whispered. "Reynolds never liked him. I'm so glad he's alive." "Quiet now," Nathaniel warned gently. "He'll give us away." "Samson, hush," Norah commanded. Remarkably, the dog quieted instantly and patted beside them. They crept through the orchard, moving from tree to tree. Nathaniel scanned the yard. One rider was leaving, the red-bearded Tate Dixon. "He's heading toward town," Norah whispered, "looking for me." "Then let's hurry," Nathaniel said. She pointed to the tall trellis on the east side of the house. "My window is the second one. Father had the trellis built so the roses could climb." "Did you use it as a ladder?" Nathaniel asked with a raised brow. Her cheeks flushed. "Sometimes." Before he could stop her, Norah climbed the trellis quickly, nimble despite her bruises. Nathaniel followed behind her. She slipped through the unlatched window, and Nathaniel climbed in after her. Inside, her room looked untouched. The air smelled faintly of lavender. Norah moved fast, grabbing a carpetbag from under the bed and stuffing dresses, papers, and a framed photograph inside. From a hidden panel in the wardrobe, she pulled out a small box. "My father's documents," she said. "The deed, certificates, everything Reynolds wants." Footsteps sounded downstairs. Reynolds' voice called out, angry and sharp, "Turner, saddle the horses. We're riding to town. The girl's with Keller somewhere." Nathaniel looked at Norah. "We have to go, now." They returned to the window. Nathaniel went first this time so he could help her down. When her boots hit the grass, they hurried toward the orchard. They were just steps from the trees when the back door slammed open. Turner Dixon stood there with a shotgun. Nathaniel shoved Norah behind an apple tree. "Stay here. If anything happens, run to the horses." Without waiting for her answer, he slipped around to the side of the orchard. He picked up a rock and hurled it at the barn. The loud crack made Turner spin toward the noise. Norah saw Nathaniel motion frantically. She grabbed Samson's collar and sprinted tree to tree until she reached the woods. Nathaniel waited until she disappeared into the shade before throwing another rock, this time at the house window. Glass shattered. Reynolds roared inside. Turner spun in circles, confused by the sounds. Nathaniel bolted. A shotgun blast tore through the air. Wood splintered around him. He ducked, ran faster, leaped over a fallen branch, and threw himself into the trees. Norah grabbed his arm as he stumbled toward their horses. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Let's go." They mounted quickly and raced out of the woods, the dog sprinting alongside them. Behind them, Reynolds shouted curses, but the forest swallowed his voice. For an hour, they rode hard, until the world grew quiet again. They slowed by a small creek and dismounted to let the horses drink. Norah touched her carpetbag protectively. "I have the deed. I have everything. We can prove he lied." Nathaniel nodded. "This is why he locked you in the barn. He knew you discovered something." Her face paled. "He would have killed me." "Not anymore," Nathaniel said. "We'll take these to the sheriff." They ate the food Mrs. Abernathy packed. Samson lay at Norah's feet, eyes alert. For a moment, peace settled between them. Then Samson's ears shot up. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Nathaniel stiffened. "Someone's coming." They packed quickly and slipped into a thicket of brush. 2 riders passed. But they were strangers heading to town. When they were gone, Nathaniel exhaled. "We keep moving. We'll enter Silver Creek from the south." By mid-afternoon, they rode down Main Street. People stared at Norah in men's clothes, but she didn't seem to notice. She held her carpetbag tightly, her jaw set with determination. They entered the sheriff's office. Sheriff Wilson's eyes widened. "Miss Bowmont? Good Lord, child. What happened to you?" For the next hour, they told him everything. Norah spread her father's papers across his desk. Her bruises spoke louder than any words. The sheriff leaned back heavily. "Miss Bowmont, with these documents and your condition, we have grounds to act." But Reynolds filed his own papers. "We need more. Something undeniable." A knock came, and Mr. Patterson, the lawyer, stepped inside with ledgers in his arms. He froze when he saw Norah. Within minutes, he too was listening to the full story. Then he said quietly, "Your father left something with me, Miss Bowmont, to give you only if he died unexpectedly." He handed her an envelope. Norah opened it with shaking fingers. Inside was a letter from her father and a small key. As she read her father's warning, the danger he sensed, the man he didn't trust, her voice broke. And then came the line that changed everything. "The key opens a strong box hidden beneath the floorboards in my study. Inside are the documents proving the ranch is yours." The sheriff stood, jaw tight with resolve. "We're going to that ranch. Tonight." Nathaniel stepped beside Norah. "I'm going with you." Her hand brushed his in silent gratitude. The sheriff loaded his gun belt. "Reynolds is dangerous, but this ends today." They rode out in a small group. Sheriff Wilson, 2 deputies, Nathaniel and Norah. Sampson ran beside them. As they neared the ranch, the sun dipped low, turning the sky orange and red. Reynolds and the Dixon brothers stood waiting on the porch. The sheriff raised his voice. "Clayton Reynolds, we have a warrant to search this property." Reynolds smirked, too calmly. Nathaniel felt a chill. Something was about to happen. The air felt tight as the small group approached the Bowmont house. The sunset cast long shadows across the yard, stretching toward the porch, where Clayton Reynolds stood with the Dixon brothers at his sides. His arms were folded, but his eyes burned with something sharp and dangerous. Sheriff Wilson dismounted first, his boots hitting the ground with a thud that echoed in the quiet evening. Nathaniel helped Norah down, keeping one hand steady on her back. Sampson stood at her side, ears flat, his growl low and warning. "Reynolds," the sheriff said firmly, "we have a legal warrant to search this property. Step aside." Quote. Reynolds smirked, leaning against a porch post like a man without a care in the world. "Search all you want. You won't find anything worth seeing." His voice carried a strange confidence that made Nathaniel tense instantly. The sheriff handed him the warrant. Reynolds glanced at it, shrugged, then pushed the door open with a mocking bow. "After you!" Nathaniel felt every instinct in his body scream that something was off, but the sheriff nodded for everyone to move, and so they stepped inside. The house was dim and quiet except for the ticking of a clock somewhere down the hall. Dust coated the shelves, and papers were scattered across tables, signs of the chaos Reynolds had created during his short rule. Norah kept close to Nathaniel as they walked toward the study. When they entered the room, Norah's breath caught. The desk, the shelves, the old bearskin rug, it was all exactly how she remembered it, except dirtier, more ruined, more empty of warmth. "The study," she whispered, pointing to the rug. "The box is under there." Sheriff Wilson motioned for her to lead the way. Nathaniel kept one hand on his holster, eyes sharp, watching the Dixon brothers who stood near the door like restless wolves. Norah knelt beside the rug and pushed it aside with shaking hands. Wood planks came into view. She pressed her fingertips along the edges until she found the loose one. "Here," she whispered. She lifted the board. A dark hole opened beneath it. Inside was a metal strongbox, just as her father had promised. She handed the key to Nathaniel. His hands were steady as he unlocked it and lifted the lid. Inside were papers, neatly tied with string, a letter, a ledger, a signed, stamped deed to the Bowmont Ranch, still in her father's name. Norah's breath hitched as she lifted them with trembling fingers. "There it is," the sheriff said. "That proves it." Nathaniel nodded. Reynolds never owned this place. Reynolds' face darkened, and then, in the next heartbeat, everything exploded. Reynolds lunged forward, pulling a small derringer from inside his vest. He grabbed Norah by her arm and yanked her toward him. pressing the gun to her head. Nathaniel froze. "Don't move," Reynolds snarled. "Drop your guns, or she dies." The sheriff and his deputies stiffened, hands raised just enough to show they weren't provoking him. Norah's breath came fast, terror flashing across her bruised face. "Let her go, Reynolds," the sheriff warned. "It's over." "No," Reynolds spat. "Not until I get what's mine." Sampson's growl deepened, his body low to the ground. "Take their guns, Tate!" Reynolds barked. Tate stepped forward, but the hound lunged with a deep, fierce snarl. Tate stumbled back, crashing into a chair as Sampson snapped at his boots. Turner backed against the wall, too startled to act. The moment of confusion was small, but it was enough. Nathaniel moved. He slammed his shoulder into Reynolds from the side, forcing him to let go of Norah. The gun fired. She screamed, but the bullet smashed into a bookshelf behind her, not her body. Reynolds and Nathaniel grappled fiercely. The Derringer fell, clattering across the floor. Reynolds swung wildly, landing a hard hit against Nathaniel's jaw. Nathaniel grunted and tackled him again, shoving him against the desk hard enough to scatter papers everywhere. Norah scrambled backward, her chest heaving. Her eyes fell on the Derringer lying near her boot. Without thinking, she picked it up. When Reynolds broke free and reached for Nathaniel again, Norah stepped forward and pointed the gun straight at him. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice shaking but strong. "Move one more inch and I'll fire." Reynolds froze. Nathaniel stepped behind him, grabbing his arms and locking them tight. Sheriff Wilson moved fast, snapping handcuffs onto Reynolds' wrists. "Clayton Reynolds, you're under arrest for attempted murder, assault, and suspected involvement in the death of Henry Bowmont." Reynolds cursed and struggled, but the sheriff dragged him toward the door. The Dixon brothers were arrested too, their faces pale with shock. Norah lowered the small gun, her hands trembling. Nathaniel turned to her, gently taking the weapon from her fingers. "You did good," he said softly. "Real good." Her eyes filled with tears. "I thought he was going to kill you." Nathaniel brushed a dirt smudge from her cheek with the back of his hand. He didn't. "I'm here." She let out a shaky breath. "I don't know what I would have done if—" "You don't have to think about that now," he said. "It's over." A long silence followed, heavy with everything she felt but couldn't say. Outside, Reynolds was being tied to a horse. The sheriff and deputies prepared to take him to town. Norah walked to the doorway, staring out at the yard. The land she grew up on. The land her father loved. The land almost stolen from her. "It's really mine again," she whispered. Nathaniel stepped behind her. "It always was. Now the whole town will know it too." She turned to him slowly, her eyes soft, shining, grateful. "Nathaniel," she said quietly, "thank you for saving my life." "You don't have to thank me," he replied. "I'd do it again, every time." Her voice trembled. "I believe you." Then, without thinking, she stepped closer, pressing a hand to his chest. He covered it with his own, their eyes held in the fading light. "Nathaniel," she whispered again. He leaned in, slow enough for her to pull away. She didn't. Their lips met, warm, gentle, full of everything that had grown between them in such a short, dangerous, unforgettable time. When they pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "What happens now?" she asked softly. He smiled. "Whatever you want, Miss Bowmont." Her hand curled around his shirt. "Then don't go too far." "Never," he promised. Outside, the sheriff's voices faded as they rode toward town. Inside, Norah and Nathaniel stood together in the quiet house her father built, the house reclaimed through courage, truth, and fierce determination. A home now safe again, and a love just beginning.